And welcome to our Channel Futures webcast. Give customers the power, how MSPs can leverage cloud choice, sponsored by Akamai. If you have any technical difficulties during today's session, please press the Help widget on your player console to receive assistance in solving common issues. If at any time you are having audio difficulties or issues with the advancing of the slides, please hit your F5 key to refresh your webcast console. Today's web seminar is being recorded and will be available on demand for 12 months starting tomorrow. You will receive an email when it is ready. Please feel free to submit any questions you may have for our speakers in the Q&A widget. Our moderator today is Dave Sobel, host of the Business of Tech podcast. And with that, the floor is all yours, Dave.
Well, thank you for that introduction. It's nice to be live. For those of you that normally hear me on this show, be fun interaction today. I've got two great guests that are going to help me talk a little bit about what's going on in the cloud and specifically how we can leverage cloud choice. So I want to introduce them each quickly first. Chandler Collison is the Vice President of Sales for Mission Cloud after previously serving as the Vice President of Solution Architects there. And he's a skilled strategist with insight into B2B sales, partnerships and negotiations, company and team building, and new product conception, design, and market launch. Chandler, thanks for joining me today.
Hey, Dave. Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
And Tom Lawrence has been in technology since 1995, starting Lawrence Systems in 2003 and IT consulting and MSP business. He's a well-known content creator with over 47 million views on YouTube and an advocate for both technology and open source. Tom, great to see you.
Great to be here.
So guys, let's dive in and talk a little bit about cloud. And what I want to start with is a little bit of sense of what you're seeing about the cloud now in 2023 after we've been talking about it for a little while. Like, what is the customer sentiment toward cloud solutions that they potentially adopted over the past few years? And in particular, as you think about that, like I'm going to start with, like, are they becoming price sensitive? Chandler, what are you seeing in terms of that customer sentiment right now?
Yeah, well, becoming price sensitive, companies have always been price sensitive. Price is clearly a factor in every technology decision that every organization is making. And I think it'd be a real mistake also to look at the at the market so monolithically. There are lots of different organizations with lots of different drivers. Lots of different internal skill sets that drive adoption of new technologies and lots of different business objectives. And so it's really important, even with a first question like that, where you're looking at the market holistically, it's really important to start breaking that market apart into what different organizations are trying to accomplish and what they're equipped with and what makes sense in terms of a solution. I will say that, so I've been in cloud for, I don't know, like 7 years, something like that, not that long. I have certainly seen in that time, in particular in the last couple of years, I would say a bit of a shift in the average sentiment on cloud. It used to be that there, certainly there were early adopters. There were companies who were looking to modernize on the cloud. There were companies that were looking to lift and shift their entire infrastructure over to the cloud. There were certainly organizations who viewed being on the cloud as intrinsically better without actually thinking through what are you trying to accomplish and where's the best place to host your tech stack. And there were an awful lot of organizations that were really, sitting on the sidelines a little bit, cautious about moving to the cloud. I don't see that cautiousness in the same way that now that I did a few years ago. It's still there for sure. Just the last few months, I've been either me directly or my team has been working with customers who have they're really taking this decision seriously about whether to move to the cloud, how to move to the cloud, why to move to the cloud, and which cloud to move to. It's a big decision, right?
Tom, want to weigh in here?
Yeah, I'm seeing what I would refer to the older legacy existing businesses become less cloud adverse. They certainly weren't really into it. They didn't always trust it. They didn't like the recurring billing from it and things like that. But what I've seen, we have kind of a split. We've got some of them older clients, been in business for quite a number of years, and we have these new startups that we've just seeing a lot of. Kind of it comes from being a content creator. They find me on YouTube, so I got all these brand new startup companies who start consulting with them, but they're already into a full cloud first. There's no such thing as on-prem dispersed teams, and I'm seeing the legacy companies, because when you start telling them what's good in the market, what's helpful to them, and they're starting to understand, going, oh wow, carrying all this legacy stuff that doesn't, has a higher capital cost, but that recurring cost in the cloud turns out not that bad and can make you a lot more efficient, better tooling. So we're seeing them, some of the market pressures, because with innovation coming at them, they're like, well, if we don't adopt to certain things in the cloud and not just running everything on-prem, it's going to be very detrimental to the business. Some of the manufacturing companies we've had were very I don't trust the cloud would be an understatement for the sentiment I get from some of these players. They just really, I don't know where it is. I don't know where my data lives. I don't know where my database is. It has always been in this back room, gesturing towards the old dusty server room they have back there. But now they're going, okay, yeah, that makes sense, because we had a power outage and no one could go through our parts inventory. Things like that. They're like, okay, because it makes sense for this high demand stuff to be in there. So I would say they're really coming around to it on all sides. And of course, as I mentioned, the younger companies, they wouldn't even dream of putting a bunch of on-prem servers, especially in the early days of their business. It doesn't make a lot of practical sense for them.
So define it for me a little bit more. We've talked about the cloud, and we're getting a sense. Okay, the reluctance isn't there, but which of those cloud things, and I have a long list of buzzwords, but I almost don't want to give them away because I want to hear what you guys come up with first. Which are the ones, when they say cloud, that they're talking about? What does that actually mean? Tom?
I'll throw the first one then. The first one really that surprising, and this is one of the reasons every time we see an attack on Exchange servers, we go, what do you mean there's an attack? Why do people still have these? This is what the younger people in cybersecurity goes. I'm like, you wouldn't believe, like large manufacturing and municipals. Those are a couple of the client bases that just won't get off Exchange. Are finally coming off it. And that's one of the big apps that I don't see any reason to run email on-prem. It just doesn't make any sense to me anymore. And if you're running it on-prem, you're 99% of the time running Exchange, and Microsoft even isn't. They're just not on top of it like they used to be. They're not showing that product to love because it competes with their cloud products. We're finally this year seeing a few of the municipals go, I guess we have to move to that. So that'd be one of the ones that I really see is just all the email, and then next one's going to be some of the document sharing in the cloud using, Office 365 for that as well. That's something that just people really want to hang on to their old legacy using Word on a desktop and a file share. But with the remote work over the last couple of years, that just broke it. They're just like, well, how do we get all the documents synced to my remote workers? So Office documents really, granted it's hosted by Microsoft Cloud Service, but that's been a big adoption for these legacy companies. That I would say is like the big elephant in the room that I was, matter of fact, the pandemic more than anything else, that work from home, work remote, that just broke all their workflows so bad they had to move to it. And so we did a lot more migrations. We finally got, more people off of Exchange than ever before.
So I think there are a couple of things that organizations are thinking about on this front. One common driving factor is when you've got a hardware refresh cycle coming up, it's a really obvious time to stop and think for a minute whether you really want to be diving into another round of buying a bunch of servers, racking them, stacking them, connecting them, configuring them, managing them, and then being tied to those servers for another 3 to 5 years or whatever your refresh cycle is. As soon as you begin to open that door, then you start to think about what else is possible. And often what we will see is either, as Tom mentioned, organizations that wouldn't even dream of putting something on-prem. They're just, the cloud's the way you do it, so it's not even a discussion. Or you start to look at things that you can do better in the cloud. So that may be simply pace of innovation. That may be that you've got a workload that really requires some massive compute power, and the last thing that you want to do is actually go buy that compute power and stick it in a server room when you're not using it all the time. It makes a heck of a lot more sense to go run that that high compute horsepower when you need it, and then shut it off. And then the other thing that's really picking up speed is data and analytics, machine learning, and AI. Obviously, as this is hit mainstream awareness with ChatGPT recently, but it goes well beyond that, just with business intelligence, data and analytics, data visualization, breaking down silos on your data footprint. Organizations more and more are aware that if they're not doing something with their data, if they're not using their data either to drive strategic decisions across their organization, or they don't have a monetization strategy for their data, then they're behind. And that's a really hard transition to make if you don't know what you're doing, and it's a really great workload for cloud infrastructure.
But yeah, I want to ask a little bit, because it's funny, the timing, because I'm actually doing some app dev myself for the first time in a while, right? And my old instincts were, okay, I'm going to build a server, and I'm going to write some software, and it'll run on an automated basis. And I quickly pivoted that, saying, okay, I could actually build this serverless. That instead of building a server to do this, I should actually lean into serverless. How much of those kind of newer technology trends, like your containerization or serverless or Kubernetes or any of these, how many of those technology trends are driving customer decisions right now?
So that's an interesting one, because it's certainly on customers' minds, and applications are often roadblocks to migrations, or at least migrations that entail modernization, because applications, by the time they've been around for a while, they can turn into real rat's nests of code, right? And you can have something that's relatively brittle. You can have something that's monolithic, and that's where it gets into a conversation about what are you trying to accomplish, where are your pinch points now, and let's not try to boil the ocean necessarily on day one. Yeah, we should be having a conversation about Kubernetes and containers and serverless and all the modern application architectures, but there's usually not a need to make those things a roadblock to actually moving into the cloud. There are often benefits to picking up an application and putting it in the cloud, not necessarily. And I wouldn't suggest to anybody listening that no matter what application you have, it's better off in the cloud. But I also would encourage every organization to let go of any thinking that if it's not in containers, if it's not running in a serverless environment, then it's not worth putting in the cloud. It's not it's not a binary all or nothing zero sum game kind of proposition. Incremental improvement is a heck of a lot more compelling than sitting around and waiting until you can do it all, because you're going to be waiting forever if you wait for the perfect time.
Well, Tom, I'm going to ask you to follow on there. Like, are you seeing those tech trends, or are there areas then that are like that are sort of the never, the areas that are kind of off limits? What are you seeing?
I would say kind of something you alluded to before is the ability to stop and start services or leverage some of these time sensitive services. For example, if you have data sets that you need to crunch, you can rent those Tesla GPUs way cheaper than you can buy them, and you only need them for the time it took to create the data set, not the actual running machine that comes out of those, large language models like ChatGPT and things like that. So these companies realize that I can rent this. It's actually, in the cybersecurity world, kind of a joke of, we calculate how long passwords take to crack and how much it would cost to crack them, because I only need them when I have this data set to crack. There's a cost associated with it, but it's not a consistent cost. I don't need, because it's not worth it to have. I mean, if I got the budget, great, I'll buy a bunch of those wonderful NVIDIA GPUs just for cracking, but I don't need them all the time, but I need them when I have a particular workload. And we have a couple of data science companies that do that. They will do the work, create the data they need, process the workload, but they only do this like a couple times a season. I believe one of my friends at a college was giving a talk on this before, where the college does it too, because they have to do all this high-end work. but temporarily. They have admissions a couple times a year. They don't need to buy massive compute to run all year to do it. So that's where you can leverage some efficiencies when you're thinking about it from a very strategic standpoint of renting the computers in the cloud, but not renting them all the time, renting them when the workload demands it. That brings a lot of efficiency and a lot of opportunity to where companies are really strategic about it, are able to go, oh, we can solve this problem. And it doesn't cost as much as we thought, because we don't have to either have the large capital expenditure to buy all the hardware ourselves, and we don't have to have that on all the time. We can rent it to compute the modules we need to do, mine the data sets that we have to get the output that we need for business intelligence, but it doesn't need to be running all the time until there's a new set of data to apply to it to, push that out there.
It's interesting you bring up that example, because that's literally the one that I was working on, is data computation, and I need to do data analysis, but I don't need that all the time. I just need it when I need it. Let me ask that then, is so with cost literally being the bit that we went to, is making sure that we're doing that there, is how much are customers shopping cloud computing cost as their ability, as linked to their choice of provider? Are they literally running the math themselves, or are they looking to you? How much is that ability to be flexible with provider driving this? Chandler?
Yeah. So customers are certainly aware of cost, and they're looking to be made more aware of cost, and to have higher confidence projections on what cost will be like. One of the scary things about cloud is that it's a pay-as-you-go, consumption-based operating expense model, when you're used to knowing exactly what your servers are going to cost, and you can plan out those costs for, you can project them to a dime, over a number of years. You cannot do that with the cloud any more than you can do it with your electricity bill or your water bill or any other utility. And so it requires a different approach. In general, I would say we don't see customers shopping different cloud platforms on price so much, but we see customers very concerned about trying to understand what the drivers of cost are. And I will say, in total defense of them, it is complicated. And especially, if you've ever seen an AWS invoice as an example, I can't tell you the number of customers who've said to me some variation of, I get this 27-page bill and I have no idea what's driving my spend. I don't mind paying whatever AWS is asking me to pay, but boy, I'd like to understand it a little bit more. And one of the things that I would really encourage every organization who's either already in the cloud or contemplating moving to the cloud to do is to recognize that managing expenses in cloud is both a specialized skill set and it's an ongoing process. You can't do it and then forget about it. You can't even do it once a year and forget about it. One of the real power benefits of the cloud is that you can manage your costs, and you can align your costs with your actual needs, your compute and storage needs. But that alignment requires active management. And if you just turn things on and forget about them, you're certainly going to be spending inefficiently, and you also expose yourself to the possibility of a surprise bill because one of your developers spun up an expensive resource to do some sandboxing in, which is great. You want people experimenting, right? That's where innovation comes from. But if you don't have guardrails in place, and you don't have processes and procedures and people and automation paying attention to these things, then you're going to come in Monday morning with a very rude awakening, perhaps from something that a developer turned on Friday and forgot to turn off for the weekend, and all of a sudden you're talking to your account manager to try and get a concession and get a credit for something that you spent big on by accident. So it's a real concern, but it's a manageable one. You just have to embrace it. It's a real opportunity, but you got to embrace it. And it is something you don't have to do when you're on-prem. It's a different skill set.
It's really interesting because I even had a friend whose task at a Fortune 1000 company was going through the cloud bill, and then they would also look at the VMs they were running and figuring out what could be consolidated across different departments, across different areas. And it was really interesting because, like, sometimes they would switch and go, why do we have 5 VMs? We can actually containerize these applications. They're all very similar. They share data with each other, so there's no cross security risk. So that's one piece of the analysis. And like you said, just making sure that someone didn't leave something running, one of these high expensive compute modules that need to do something. It's also what you break down to the customers. You can't just tell them like, the price. We can't give you easy projections, but you can start building on it. You got to build a process and kind of a feedback loop of where we work to examine it over time. Like, this is your application run. We're going to set it up like this. It runs efficiently. All right, what can we do to tune it next month? So it's kind of a constant tuning ongoing to get more predictive. It's not it's workload dependent sometimes, trying to scale it, making sure you're going to be able to keep up with it. And of course, if you have a popular application, how does it scale? And will that scaling have an impact on cost? So you want to be successful, but if you have a successful website that has too much volume hitting it, you're going to have a bigger bandwidth bill. And now you're throwing a monkey wrench into the financial projection, but also hopefully that's doing conversion to whatever the goal is on the site. So it actually has a financial benefit as well to keep up with it. It's kind of like you have to develop a whole system and process and kind of bring the client along with it, because how much does it cost is where they start. You're like, this is like any other process. There's a ton of variables, and it takes a lot of clear forward in the beginning of the sales process to get them to understand all the variables that even you have to admit yourself that are not easily calculated.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, we at Mission, we have a whole team of people who do nothing but focus on cost optimization with our customers. And it's really important to think about it on multiple levels. There's making sure that you provision the right size, the right instance types, the right sizes for your workloads. Make sure that you keep those tuned over time. There's environmental cleanup. There's operations, shutting things off automatically when you're not using them. And then, Dave, to get back to one of your questions earlier about modern application architectures, that's a real way to drive performance efficiency. If you've got a monolithic app, then there's less that you can do to tune your environment for optimization, for efficient performance and cost efficiency. But as you know, Tom, that costs money. You can't, you're not going to suddenly go serverless for nothing. So it really does require some thought and thinking in terms of a multi-year journey. You're not going to go to the cloud and fix everything, on day one. It's a journey, not a task.
Now, I always like bringing things back to a P&L. And every time we spend a bunch of time talking about cost, I know that I'm living a little too much down in that SG&A expense line item. So I want to move your thinking out of that a little bit and say, okay, guys, how are you helping customers measure success, ideally in cost of goods sold or revenue? But what are you doing to help measure that level of success for them?
Well,
Chandler?
For us, it starts with with each customer. What are you trying to accomplish? What does success look like for you? Why are you contemplating moving into the cloud? But that can change all kinds of things. That can change the speed of innovation that your product team is able to chase. That can change your pricing model. Back to your customers. For a lot of software companies, moving to the cloud is tied to moving to a SaaS model, which is obviously potentially transformative from a business standpoint. It's really changing what your revenue stream looks like. Access to data-driven insights, data-driven intelligence, and monetization of data streams is a way that some companies are defining success. And as we were discussing earlier, those are workloads that are particularly well suited for the cloud. Sometimes it's about lowering costs. It's not on the revenue side. It's really about driving operational efficiency or removing capital costs. Being in the cloud also makes possible the whole idea of charging back technology costs back to your customers. You can change your pricing model for your products because you can tie consumption on particular cloud infrastructure back to projects, back to teams, back to customers, back to products. There are all kinds of things that you can do differently because you have a much more granular look at what your technology costs are compared to when you're running on-prem. But it really comes down to, what are you as an organization thinking about? What are you trying to accomplish, and what does your business look like?
Tom, you're nodding. How are you measuring with customers there?
It's a lot the same. What he said there is you start with what their goal is, and to me, it's always easy to use like examples of a company that was selling a lot of parts online for things, and they had one of the most, I can't believe it worked, type of setups where they were actually serving up their database over a connection on-prem to off-prem, but it was actually, they were just so cloud averse to it. They thought this is like their bread and butter was their database, and they couldn't get the people to synchronize these used parts they would pull off of trucks and things like this. And this is a pretty large scale site. But by bringing them over to the cloud, they could see, oh, it's much faster. Google's not timing out when they index, and their parts got found faster in Google by doing it. And we just synchronized. So their database on the cloud was always maybe an hour behind of their actual database on inventory, which is fine for them because a lot of the inventory sits with long wait times. People just looking for it. They Google search when they need the part, just having that inventory faster available. So the speed justified all that cost that was to build it, because it was a big lift to get it off of this weird setup that was kludged together by some smart internal IT people, but not quite forward thinking to get it all the way to the cloud and build a full application around it. But when we're done, the later, ROI, revisit that client a year later, like, man, this is amazing. Orders are substantially higher. Things are faster. We actually got properly indexed in Google when people search for parts. So you're able to tie it to the whole thing on, the long term of the project.
Now, Tom, you said something a minute ago that I want to follow up on, because you were alluding to all the processes and the procedures around that deployment. Now, my MSP brain immediately goes to standardization, process. Those are supposed to be tenets of managed services. How much is standardization play into the way that you're looking at deployments with the cloud?
Very much. I'm very process driven. Since my long career, I've learned it's got to have a process. It's got to have steps that people can follow. So the cloud's no different than that. It's got to have a maintenance schedule. It's got to have an entire flow to it to make sure it does exactly as it's supposed to do, and that there's people maintaining it along the way. But that also goes back into the cost modeling of it as well, to make sure that's all tied together. So the salespeople are involved. It can understand and align with that P&L to make sure it's going to cost us much, but here's the ROI that we can use to measure. What are those metrics that we can put in there? It's all just part of the process that when we put it together for them.
Chandler, are they all custom deployments, or are you standard? How are you guys tackling that?
Well, it's a mix. Everybody likes to think that you can standardize. And there are lots of things you can standardize, and operations is a place where I would put a heavy emphasis on standardization and process, and change advisory control and things like that. When we're talking about designing and building an AWS environment for our customers, that's every one of those is bespoke to a particular customer's requirements. Now, obviously, every bespoke environment uses Legos that already exist in our toy cabinet. And part of the reason that you use an organization like Mission to accelerate your journey to the cloud is because we have all these templates. We've got organizationally defined best practices, so you're not dependent on some any given engineer's bright idea for how they should do something. We have defined best practices. We have defined ways of doing things. But if we're not focused on the unique needs of each unique customer when we're architecting and when we're implementing, then we're missing the boat, right? So, and then the other thing that I would say is that everything needs to be replicatable. Everything should be governed by infrastructure as code, so that you're not dependent. You can recover quickly if you need to, and you're not so exposed to human mistakes. Code-based deployments provide a real safety net against the possibility of somebody going and doing something careless, or even something malicious. Though that's really not that's not the scenario that we're really trying to protect against. People just make mistakes, right? And code-based deployments are a really good safeguard against well-intentioned people just making human mistakes, because we do.
I
using
can't let
tools
you.
like
I
Terraform
can't
to
let you get
standardize it.
away with. I can't let you get away with too much unique. Every customer's unique flower, because, you know what? While all of our customers are always exact unique flowers, when we actually get into the brass tacks of it, there's a lot that is very similar. They don't, you know, that is very much standard. So give me a little bit more of an insight of your perspective of how much actually is bespoke for a customer versus how much is really reusable. A little bit more specifics on that.
Yeah, that's a totally fair question, and it's probably, I'm making numbers up here a little bit, but it's probably somewhere in the 80 to 90% is not necessarily the same, but fundamentally similar. It's pulled from the same bin of Legos. But then how you assemble those is where some of the uniqueness comes in. And then, particularly in more complex environments, there's more. The percentage that is truly unique to that particular environment is going to go up. When you're talking about some more advanced workloads, biotech companies running complex imaging on tissue samples, for instance. You're getting into more edge case kinds of things, but for running your back office, 95% of it is the same. The basic construction of the environment, your multi-account structure, your basic networking. Of course, that's all going to be the same starting point, which is good, right? You want to be starting from the same starting point in those cases, because those are well-tested, bugs wrung out, proven solutions to building a foundation. There's no need to reinvent the wheel, because there's no competitive advantage in that. There's nothing unique that an organization is trying to do off of the basic networking in most cases.
Right. And there's obviously a difference between the way we treat them during a sales process and the leverage tools and those Legos in the technical implementation.
There is not. They're special every moment that we're talking about them.
Right. Well, I want to make sure to alert our audience. We're going to be taking questions here just a moment. So on the left-hand side of your panel there's an opportunity to put questions in. I see them already queuing up, and I'm going to be diving to there in just a moment. But before I do, I want to bring on James Steele from Akamai to tell us a little bit about their solution, and then we will have him join us for this discussion as we answer some of your questions. Make sure to put those in here. James, tell us a little bit more about what you and Akamai are up to.
Thank you, Dave. I think we've heard enough from the industry experts with their insightful contributions and actionable takeaways to grow your MSP business. What we need is a vendor sales pitch. My name's James. I'm from the partner team on the Akamai cloud computing side. So we're formerly Linode. If you find the cost and the complexity potentially of the big three isn't always ideal, not the right fit for every customer, I'm hoping you're going to find this interesting. So our business is essentially compute. So we're talking about virtual private servers, shared and dedicated, offerings like storage, managed databases, Kubernetes. And as you can see, in terms of the common cloud computing primitives, as we like to call them, they're pretty comparable to AWS services. So the question is, how do we differ? I never like to compete on the price alone, but there's a very big reason that people come to us, and that's because we are around about 30 to 40% of the cost of the hyperscalers when you're looking at the core compute services. So there's a huge saving there. You can either absorb or pass on to your customer as part of your cloud projects. A fundamental way we're different, and this really is the crux of it, is we want your customers to stay with us because they want to, not because they've got locked into a expensive managed proprietary service. So we're experts in the open source field and open source technologies, and there's an amazing depth of applications out there that do the same, if not more, and they're normally portable. So as you can see, that's a picture of our cloud manager. It's really simple to spin up services, choose a specification of server, as you can see, distribution, location, and really you're there in minutes. And of course, you've got the command line tool and the API, which does the same as the cloud manager. Support is so the pricing is pretty much a simple, straightforward monthly price. It's an hourly or capped at a month. So we bundle CPU, transfer, and storage all in one simple cost. So no headaches with the quoting we talked about earlier on, and it simplifies things massively. Support, that's definitely our bag. Everyone says it, but regardless of how much you're spending, you can actually pick up the phone and speak to us around the clock and speak to someone who is at least a certified Linux administrator, someone who really knows their stuff straight away and can put you back on track. So I think in summary, we talked about unique flowers. Basically, being an Akamai cloud computing partner gives you, it's about having another option in your portfolio, not necessarily leaving the hyperscalers lock and stock, but there are times when customer requirements, those unique flowers require something slightly different. And it's about having a provider that's a good fit for each one of those customers' needs. If you'd like to know more, the best way, I always think with these things, is to get hands-on. So we're offering anyone on the webinar $500 of free cloud credit. That's a special offer for the webinar alone. So get hands-on, spin up some services, use our marketplace, try out some applications, and of course, speak to us. So we have a professional services team. We'd love to talk to you about whether it's hosting a WordPress site or anything up to a sort of a more complex cloud migration, multi-cloud scenario. We love talking about that stuff, particularly as I mentioned in this open source realm. Last but not least, if you're going to be there at Channel Partners Expo in Vegas, make sure you let us know. I'll send you an email after this. Please reply to it. Let me know you're going to be there, and we'll put aside a copy of this book only for people on this webinar. Paperback book, fantastic. Author Mark Coatman. It's 100 MSP secrets revealed, so it's worth having. Thank you very much. I'm really enjoying this chat. Dave, I'm going to hand it back to you.
Well, thank you for that. That's a great book too. I know. So if you get an opportunity to go out to Vegas, grab a copy of it. It is a great book. Mark did a great job compiling a bunch together. So I'm going to start diving in with some audience questions, guys. The first up here is from listener Quack. What are the agreement tools or terms for engagement to provide a managed service as an MSP? Because the customer can wreak some real havoc to the quality of service if they're letting other vendors, even on purpose, to mix in there. What are you putting together from a terms of agreement and agreement terms that look around the cloud services that you're offering? Chandler, you want to take that one?
Sure. All of our customers are on AWS. AWS is all we do. So every customer has an AWS customer agreement, and then if they're working with us for operations, we have a standard stack of tools that we deploy. We use Cloud Health for cost management, New Relic for infrastructure management, and Alert Logic for security. And then we have our own proprietary platform as well called Mission Control. That's a good example of where standardization of tools is really beneficial, because it allows then our operations teams to work in a way that is essentially the same across customers. So there's an awful lot that's the same, and then they drill down when in response to an alert, everything's driven off of a run book, or when they're doing cost optimization analysis with customers. But that standardization across the tech stack, across our customer base, allows for two things. One is to make sure that we don't have those quality of service issues that are, that the questioner is I think getting at. And the other is that it gives us economies of scale. It lets our team reach operational efficiency. And one of the premises behind a managed service provider is that we can do it better than our customers can on their own. And the reason we can do it better than our customers can on their own is because it's our full-time job, and we're doing it at scale. So we can build tool sets and processes, procedures, team motions that are really geared towards operational efficiency and ensuring that workloads are available, secure, and performant at all times.
Tom, are yours similar, or are there different bits that you're adding to that mix?
I would say right up front, Chandler's is more mature than ours for dealing with that. So I'll be honest about it, because we don't do as much cloud for that, but it's the same. It's also a matter of making sure the client understands where the things are. We're always going to be the first point of contact, but yeah, if AWS East has another outage, and that's where something's hosted, or there's an Azure incident, they understand, we're going to be the point of contact for it, but there are other players involved. It's not necessarily a failure on our part or the systems. So making sure that they understand where the chain is of it. We'll always be responsible, but we always like to be clear where that chain is for the different environments that their systems are hosted in.
So Danny brings up that the big question here is that customers would be asking is do you want to maintain your own network, or do you want to go to a cloud service, and have the monthly expense all the time? How are you answering that debate and that balance when customers ask about the difference between like an equipment CapEx expense versus the monthly, subscription expense? Tom?
That one's a little bit easier because we look at what their workloads are. And we have a company that, has some stuff out of the cloud now because it was such a predictable workload. It's just cheaper to stick it in a colo. It's like 80 VMs that do call analytics at all of their sites across the US. The call volumes are extremely predictable. It was actually cheaper to throw that in there. So it turned out that saved them money over time, even with you add the expenses in there. So there's times when we've run into it where when you rationalize it out, and if you have a very static, predictable workload, that you can actually say, you're right, it's better to maintain it, usually in a colo, not necessarily the back room. One other exception to that is we do a lot with the movie industry stuff, and they're becoming cloud adverse a little bit because some of the as the movies have gotten bigger, so some of that stuff, the conversation is about how you expand and keep it all on-prem when you have 2 petabytes of storage for movies you're editing and things like that, because it just is less practical, although companies have tried and kind of flopped on putting it in cloud. So sometimes those conversations go the other way, but when they are like a new company, fast growth, and then you're like, does it predict it? How fast can I get you a server? Because it's not just this static load. It's you plan to hire 10 more salespeople. You hired to do this. Great. How do you plan to outfit all of that? Sometimes cloud's going to be faster because I can spin things up faster and I can rack servers. So the conversation can be shifted towards the lead time would be this, the cost is this, and it comes a little bit more challenging to do. And they go, okay, I see why those recurring fees might make sense because it gives us the elasticity we need to grow as needed.
Chandler, I see you nodding. You want to add to that?
Yeah. The couple things that I want to add to that. One is that I really do, in my heart of hearts, believe that it is a mistake to look at the on-prem versus in the cloud question, or colo, pick your variant, as purely a cost consideration. That's just they're different, and you really need to be thinking about what you're trying to accomplish and where does that workload run best, where will that be most cost effective, and then go and design a cost effective implementation of that workload. The other thing that I think is important to note on this front is that if an organization who is accustomed to running workloads on-prem goes to do a cost estimation of running in the cloud, it is almost a certainty that they're going to vastly overestimate what those costs are going to be, because they're going to look at what they're running on-prem and they're going to go provision that in their cost calculator on the cloud platform, and they're going to end up with a massively over-provisioned environment, and they're going to get sticker shock. It's important to, when you look at costs, to do the costing not on a straight like for like, but to actually look at what kind of processing and storage capacity you're actually using on-prem, and then to start thinking about how can you optimize that in the cloud from a sizing standpoint, and then also think about what kind of financial engineering you can do while you're running workloads in the cloud, because there is an awful lot that you can do to manage and drive down your costs when you're committed to running workloads in the cloud.
So, and I'm sure this question from listener Donna is near and dear to your heart, Tom. How much does open source play in to the consideration that customers are making about their cloud services?
I don't know that the customer thinks as much about the open source. They do think a lot about the licensing models. And one of the selling points I usually have is with open source, especially when you talk about products that have good support contracts, you say, well, they're not locking you into license, they're locking you, or not locking you at all. They're just offering support. And that seems to be an easier sell. They're like, they understand what they're paying for, because saying I'll get the license, okay, how's their support? Well, I don't know. But when you turn it around and say I'm paying for support, here the software is free, but supporting it has a cost. Get the update delivery pipeline has a cost. I'll just throw Bitwarden out there as an easy example of a piece of software that's built on exactly that model. Here's all of our code. It's open source. Oh, by the way, we sell support as a pipeline delivery for all the updates. And more companies doing it like that. It makes it kind of an easier, more comfortable sell, because then the customer goes, oh, I'm not just paying for the magic that was created. I'm actually paying for the people that wrote the magic to support the software on there. So that's usually how those conversations go. They're not necessarily, people aren't always open source advocates like me and even think about the source and licensing of the code as much. But when you sell to them as this is how this is developed and supported, and they understand that pipeline, I think it's an easier sell for them.
James, I know you've talked to a lot of partners specifically about this. What have you been hearing?
Yeah, I think what it is, I mean, people expect some guidance, and there can be some hesitation for sure around, open source if they're not familiar. And people will often think open source as being, as Tom alluded to, that free application. But when they understand there's a team behind it, it can make a lot of sense. So we see ourselves as the sort of, something of a guiding light, we can piece it together. But I think another really important area, if you're in the MSP space, is you'll know that these companies, every time a great bit of software pops up, it gets gobbled up by venture capital or whatever. So it's to have that kind of extraction from that risk as well is just one of the many reasons I think, open source is something that people should certainly consider. It's not always the right answer, but certainly should be on the list to consider these solutions.
Well, guys, I want to be super respectful of your time, because you've given us a bunch of insights here, and I really do appreciate it. Chandler, Tom, James, thanks for joining me today. Really do appreciate the conversation.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, guys. Really enjoyed it. Cheers.
Well, Emily, we're wrapped up here. I want to throw it to you to take us home and tell everyone how they can get all the information and such from here.
Thanks, Dave. Before we go, I'd like to once again thank Akamai for sponsoring today's event, as well as Dave, Chandler, Thomas, and James for the very informative discussion. Just a reminder, this seminar will be available on demand starting tomorrow, so please feel free to come back and review. Have a great day, and thank you for attending.